Hello, everybody. Welcome to CSIS webinar this afternoon. We are very honored to have our Foreign Minister, Her Excellency Ibu Retno Marsudi, with us. And she is going to talk with us about still with the COVID-19, but this time it's about the international cooperation between Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and probably beyond. And we exactly have an hour. Thank you, Ibu, for for agreeing to do this. I know you must be very busy, and you've been very generous to give us 1 hour of your precious schedule. And for the participants now, it is streamed to YouTube as well. And later, after Ibu Retno's presentation, if you want to ask questions, just post it to the Q&A tab below the screen of your Zoom. And for those of you on YouTube, you can also post your question in the comment, and then it will be relayed to Zoom here. Now, I'd like to give the time for our Foreign Minister, Ibu Retno Marsudi, to present what Indonesia is thinking about the international cooperation on how we can best tackle this problem of COVID-19 together with other countries. Ibu, the time is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Pak Philips. Hi, everybody, and I do hope that you are all well. And of course, first of all, thank you very much to Pak Yusuf Anandi and to you, Pak Philip, and of course for the CSIS for inviting me to speak today on the international cooperation to mitigate COVID-19. Video conference meeting like this have become a new normal for all of us. And yesterday, for example, my agenda was very full with series of video and teleconference meeting from early in the morning until late at night. One of the meetings, before I start, I would like to share with you that one of the meetings that I had yesterday was with more than 20 foreign ministers under the Alliance for Multilateralism, which discussed our support to multilateralism, including to World Health Organization. So, all right, for today, allow me to touch upon 3 key issues. First is the magnitude of the COVID-19 challenge. And then the second one is on the international politics and international cooperation. And the third one is the focuses of the Indonesian foreign policy right now. Let me start with the first issue, that is the magnitude of COVID-19 challenge. Colleague, friends, I'm sure that you will agree with me that COVID-19 is the greatest health crisis of our time. It is the great equalizers, and no country is immune from it. If we look at the number of confirmed cases worldwide, it has exceeded 2.1 million with nearly 140,000 deaths. I always say that COVID-19 is not simply a health crisis, but it also has severe socio-economic implication. The IMF said that it was anticipating the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. In our Southeast Asia region, growth is expected to drop to 1%. That is the data from the Asian Development Bank. This economic fallout could drive additional 11 million people into poverty in East Asia and the Pacific region. That is the data from the World Bank. And the WTO data said that the global trade could dwindle to between 13 to 32%. Talking about job losses. Job losses are looming in hardest hit sector, including the informal employment. And almost 38% of the global workforce are employed in sectors experiencing severe output decline. That is the data from the ILO. Look, I want to convey just a factual statement. Experts offered different projections on how the crisis will end. Some of the optimistic ones argue that the virus will not dwindle for months, not cause millions of deaths. That is on one hand. But the other are more pessimistic, predicting that the virus will eventually infect half of the global population. What is sure, there are still many unknown about the virus. That is very sure. And this contributes to the difficulties in designing effective policy responses. Now this brings us to the second issue, that is the international politics and international cooperation. Friends, colleagues, COVID-19 has impacted international politics in many ways. Let us look at what countries did so far. Again, this is just a factual statement. Countries sealed their borders, imposed lockdown and travel restriction, closing non-essential works and services, unveiled surveillance programs for contact tracing, and some start limiting export for medical equipment. On one hand, we all understand that those policies are necessary, and we understand as well that those policies are temporary in nature, because protecting the health of the people, of course, is the top priority right now. However, on the other hand, at the same time, people start to question the effectiveness of multilateralism and international cooperation in addressing global challenges. This is also understandable. Some say multilateralism is at peril. And beyond multilateralism, COVID-19 also amplifies distrust among people and countries, feeding into populist and anti-globalization rhetoric. And there is also, if you look at the situation right now, there is also a growing stigmatization. Some view survival in the time of COVID-19 as a zero-sum game. Fearing shortages of essential supplies, many countries embrace protectionism. This is particularly apparent in the case of medical equipment. As the virus advances, there is a possibility that such protectionism could spill over into other products, including foods. And COVID-19 is testing our faith in multilateralism and international cooperation and their virtue in solving global challenges. So friends and colleagues, observing this worrying situation, one thing that we have to do together, that is to rebuild our trust on global health governance. We must guard and keep up the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of collaboration and solidarity. No country, no matter how powerful and prosperous, could tackle this challenge on its own. It is only by come together can we win this battle against COVID-19. And this brings me to the need of strengthening the international cooperation. We are in a war to fight not only the pandemic itself, but also to prevent global economic downturn. In this spirit, I always say that we should not lose sight of long-term perspective, which call for strengthening of international cooperation and collaboration to effectively deal with COVID-19. And in this context, it is fair to say that in normal situation, it is easier to maintain cooperation, friendship, and partnership. However, in abnormal situation, or we can call it in the new normal situation like now, it might be more challenging. Indonesia is among those at the forefront to keep the international cooperation alive and brings benefit for the people of the world. From my engagement with my colleagues, the foreign ministers so far, I still see the spirit of cooperation. And even I see the spirit of cooperation remains high. It is important that we continue to keep up and nurture that spirit. And this is a crucial modality for all countries to successfully overcome COVID-19. I will explain further what Indonesia did in the next part of my presentation. Now it comes to my third point in addressing the challenges we face above, talking about the Indonesian foreign policy priorities. At least there are three main priorities right now. First is addressing pandemic itself. Second is mitigating the economic impact. And then the third one is protecting Indonesian citizens abroad as well as foreign nationals in Indonesia. Priority number 1 and number 2 are closely interlinked. On priority number 1 and number 2, Indonesia consistently aspires to ensure that our containment measure in restricting the movement of the people will not disrupt trade and supply chain, including, of course, the medical goods and medicine. Like other countries, Indonesia and the world in general is facing shortages of various medical supplies. I mentioned it also in the first part of my presentation. So in this connection, collaboration with other countries is not just necessary, but it is a must. Allow me to explain what we are doing bilaterally, regionally, as well as internationally. Bilaterally, we try to explore more innovative ways. I repeat, more innovative ways by enhancing cooperation between countries with raw material and countries with technology and human resources. I give two examples. Yesterday, during the press briefing, I also mentioned about these two examples. Indonesia and ROK, and Indonesia and Japan. We are now having the practical joint production scheme for medical supplies such as PPEs. Indonesia, of course, appreciates cooperation rendered by 9 countries, 8 international organizations, and 55 NGOs in the provision of masks, rapid tests, and PPEs. At the regional and global level, Indonesian diplomacy plays an active role in mobilizing and coordinating the worldwide responses to this pandemic. Indonesia, with other 5 countries, that is Ghana, Liechtenstein, Norway, Singapore, and Switzerland, we have mobilized a global solidarity to fight against the outbreak of COVID-19. We, the 6 countries, co-initiated a UNGA resolution on the 2nd of April on global solidarity to fight against COVID-19. And in fact, that was the first UNGA resolution adopted virtually. This resolution was co-sponsored by 188 countries, and this is once again a testament and signal of global solidarity and support. This unprecedented health crisis in human history required unprecedented global response. So channel of communication between our leaders, among foreign ministers and other related ministers continue to be intensified by the day. And to be very honest to you, Pak Philip, I have never seen before such kind of very intensive communication. To mention a few, the G20 Extraordinary Summit that took place on 26th of March, the ASEAN Special Summit and ASEAN Plus 3 Special Summit just 3 days ago on the 14th of April. And Indonesia was amongst those who proposed the summit. The OIC Steering Committee on Health, in which Indonesia is a member, which agreed to step up collaboration to confront COVID-19 in Islamic countries. At my level, I have also had intensive communication with many foreign ministers and will continue to do so. For instance, the COVID-19 International Coordination Group, in which I joined through a weekly teleconference with various foreign ministers, and I will have it again this evening. And last night, I discussed the impact of COVID-19 on women with other women foreign ministers. And I raised during the debate with the women foreign minister, I raised the importance of protection to women and at the same time empowering women as part of the solution to fight COVID-19. Another platform with foreign minister is the Alliance for Multilateralism. I mentioned it in the beginning of my presentation. So more than 20 foreign ministers participated in the debate where I conveyed two messages. One is on the importance to continue to stand behind the World Health Organization, and second is to ensure that our multilateral system delivers to address the immediate need of our people. On issue related to protecting our citizen and foreign national in Indonesia, of course, what I can say is that our doors is open for repatriation effort, and I do hope that others also open their door for repatriation. One thing that we have to observe in any repatriation is the compliance to the health protocol in line with the WHO standard. So in short, Pak Philip, our diplomacy works actively to explore innovative collaboration at all levels to jointly overcome and mitigate this pandemic. Friends and colleagues, last but not least, since our team today also touched on Southeast Asia, so allow me also to talk a bit on the ASEAN cooperation. To cut the story short, ASEAN has been responding to COVID-19 outbreak since the very beginning, and I'm glad to see ASEAN mechanism works amidst the crisis. Singapore, for example, was among the first country to render its assistance to Indonesia. With Malaysia, I've been in close contact with its foreign minister, particularly to address the protection of Indonesian workers in Malaysia. In fact, just before this meeting, I just talked again with Foreign Minister of Malaysia. And then the ASEAN Coordinating Council, the ACC, so far had conducted 2 meetings, including the one to prepare the ASEAN and the ASEAN +3 summit. The health minister of ASEAN +3 also had a meeting on the 7th of April, and they also have been in close communication. And speaking of ASEAN Plus and ASEAN +3 summit, what I can say is that both summits went well, and they demonstrated the leadership and solidity of ASEAN as well as ASEAN +3 partnership in the face of COVID-19 challenge. The summit managed to achieve a number of important things. First, strengthen spirit of unity, solidarity, as well as commitment to enhance cooperation. Second, agreement to activate all relevant mechanisms within ASEAN plus ASEAN +3, such as AMRO, CMIM, APTER, and President Widodo talked also about the establishment of ASEAN +3 task force on pandemic and underline his conviction that the group, the ASEAN +3, will get through this crisis together. And third, identify new forms of cooperation, including proposal to establish COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund, a task force to ensure the ASEAN +3 countries can better respond to any future outbreak, and the FPT reserve of essential medical supplies. So to conclude, Pak Philip and friends, COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic we see in the region and the world. It might not even be the worst. What will make the danger far worse is the lack of comprehensive global preparedness to prevent this. So we need to be prepared, and we need to act in unison. We need to learn from this crisis and emerge stronger. Indonesia is certainly committed to dealing with the challenges at hand, but we are also looking ahead to promoting better cooperation and collaboration with all stakeholders to jointly overcome COVID-19 and indeed any future public health emergency. That way, we can say never again to this global crisis. So thank you very much, friends, colleague, Pak Philip. Stay healthy, stay strong, and stay united. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Retno Marsudi, for the presentation. And I believe that under your leadership and Indonesia's leadership, ASEAN can really tackle this problem together and prevent this from reoccurring in the future. Before I open the Q&A tab, if I may ask one question, because I'm interested in the mechanism of ASEAN. What would be the channel? Because I understand we have some channels within ASEAN, the health ministers and AHA Center. I would like, if you could update us on AHA Center, perhaps as a channel, or for stockpiling the medical supplies and and all those things that we need on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the medical, for health-related issues, of course, the main channel is through the ASEAN and ASEAN +3 health minister communication. It's very clear because during the summit, the leaders tasked the health minister to follow up all they agreed. And on the economic side, during the ASEAN summit, leaders encouraged or tasked, to be more precise, tasked the economic minister to start designing the recovery post the pandemic. And talking about AHA Center, I have to say that during the APT summit, there is also agreement of the realization of establishment of APT reserve of essential medical supplies. And we would like also to optimize the use, the facility of regional emergency reserve that now is managed by AHA Center. So for sure, AHA Center will be part of our future endeavor, Pak Philip.
Okay, thank you, Ibu. Now, there are some questions already. I will only be able to pick some because our time is rather limited. But there's this one concrete question from, I think, Mas Wahyu Susilo of the Migrant Care. And I think this is also a very important question because Ramadan and Idul Fitri are coming. And the question is, what is the foreign ministry's plan on the migrant exodus coming back to Indonesia from overseas?
Okay, well, Mas Wahyu, thank you very much for the question. How are you, Mas? Hopefully that you are well. One of the priority attention of the government of Indonesia now is the presence of our nationals in our citizens in Malaysia. We know very well that if we talk about the registered Indonesian living temporarily in Malaysia, then we have around 1.1 million Indonesian. But we understand as well that the real number of Indonesian living in Malaysia is much, much bigger than the registered number. So some said that it could be more than 3 million. Now from 18 March, why I mentioned about the 18 March, because on the 18 March is the start of the implementation of the Movement Control Order, the MCO. So if you look at from 18 March until 14 April, then we got the number how many Indonesian already come home from Malaysia, both by air, by sea, and by land border. The total right now is 81,648. That is from, again, air, sea, and land border. And of course, we are not only talking about those coming back to Indonesia, which of course we try to have a cooperation with the Malaysian authority on the point of embarkation, as well as our point of entries. During the meetings, the coordinating meeting, I always remind my colleagues from the cabinet members about the health protocol that have to be complied during the arrival for all Indonesian, because once again, we have to protect, of course, our Indonesian national abroad, but we have also the responsibility to protect our people in Indonesia as well. Now it comes to, because some also ask about the assistance of, what is that, the basic needs of our Indonesian living in Malaysia. We try to help them with the basic needs that they needed. And so far I have the number here, because the paper is that many. So I'll try to look into my paper. Where's my paper on the we call it here the sembako. So far we have more than 100,000 sembako that distributed both by the organization, the community organization in Malaysia, as well as by our embassies, consulate general in Malaysia. So the total sembako that has been distributed is 121,223. And every day we try to increase the number. So that is the situation about our citizen living in Malaysia. Once again, terima kasih, Mas Wahyu.
Thank you, Ibu Retno, for the response. There are some questions. This is from Killian Spendler. He's asking about the possibility, but I think you already did mention this. European Union and the African Union, for example, have established dedicated disease control centers in response to the large-scale epidemic. Do you see this coming in ASEAN as well, with sufficient resources and investment being put into this kind of collaborative effort in the form of disease center?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question. During the ASEAN plus 3 meeting, there is also initiative, or that is very initial, but at least it is mentioned. It was mentioned during the ASEAN and ASEAN plus 3 on the possibility of establishing, like the CDC, the ASEAN CDC in ASEAN. So the idea was floating during the summit, and of course, we would like to follow it up. And I already talked to the Health Minister of Indonesia to follow it up. So it's there, and it was discussed during the summit.
All right. Thank you. This is another question coming from Hannah Adistiana Hefni. She's asking the AOIP, the possible ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, the possible expansion of the scope of cooperation of the AOIP, because this is certainly something that at the same time
ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Oh,
Indo-Pacific.
That is the Indo-Pacific, right?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
So we are focusing on the COVID, then all right, okay,
right.
Indo-Pacific, yes.
Is it possible to expand or to insert this scope of cooperation into this Indo-Pacific wide cooperation?
I think if you look at on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, then we will find for priorities areas of cooperation, and one of the priorities areas is on the SDGs. And I mean, amidst this crisis, amidst the pandemic, it is very relevant for us to talk about SDGs, because SDGs is also covering the issue related to health. So I think that will be also fit that we include issue of health cooperation under the scheme or the framework of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Ibu Retno, I feel like I'm the radio announcer. Well, and this is, I think, very important question. We know from Muhammad Rifki Daneswara, we know various countries start the research and development towards the finding of vaccine. Now, is Indonesia being part of this global effort in finding the vaccine? Is there any cooperation between Indonesia and any other country in this scientific part of the COVID-19 effort mitigation?
Yeah, talking about, I must start from the WHO solidarity trial. So there is a solidarity trial established by WHO and invite countries interested to join the trial. And the trial is actually addressing about the medicine and the possibility to develop vaccine. And Indonesia is one of the party of Indonesia is part of the solidarity trial. And talking about vaccine, what the concern of us, especially the developing countries, is that when the vaccine is there are two issues. About the availability, so the access to the vaccine itself. And then the second one is the affordability, especially when we talk about developing countries. So development of vaccine is very important. And I think we are now trying to work harder for the vaccine. But next question, and we have to ensure that it will be there, that is about the access as well as for the affordability of the vaccine for all.
All right, thank you, Ibu. There's another question. We talked earlier about the migrant workers, but there are also Indonesian students overseas, like in Australia and other countries. What would be the plan for these students if the situation in the countries they are studying are getting worse?
Of course, again, we observe the situation not only day by day, but maybe minutes by minutes. So I'm always in a close communication with all the team across the globe, and trying to discuss especially or in particular about the Indonesian living there. Since you mentioned about Australia, then I have to mention also that a couple days ago, I mean, the Foreign Minister of Australia is always in a constant communication as well with me. And last night, in fact, we had a communication as well there in Australia. I think it's almost midnight because here is about 7 p.m. So one of the issues that I raised with my good friend Maurice is about the presence of the Indonesian students in Australia. And my ambassador, together with the ASEAN ambassadors in Australia, had wrote also a letter to the Minister of Education in Australia to raise the issue of the presence of the ASEAN students in Australia, which is the number is very big, and then to explore possible flexibility, facilitation from the government of Australia to ASEAN, of course, including Indonesia, students living in Australia. So, Pak Philip, the point is that we observe the situation minute by minute. We give the attention in Australia, including the student, and we bring this issue to the attention of the government there.
All right, thank you. Now, this is my own question, if I may. The other side of the coin is the domestic side. Now we know that this COVID-19, both are domestic phenomenon as well as international phenomenon. Would you update us on how is the dynamics between Foreign Ministry, the BNPB, the Disaster Mitigation Agency, and the Health Ministry with regard to this? What are the kind of a division of labor between the three?
The Foreign Ministry, the Foreign Minister is part of the task force to mitigate COVID-19. So I'm part of the team. Every week we have the meeting chaired by the president himself. And I think when we talk about the division of labor, of course, it's clear. I mean, for me, it's something related to the international engagement, but we support each other. So if there is any problem, any issue that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could support, of course, by all means, we immediately supported the issue. Because sometimes in the process of the international cooperation, for example, the availability or the order of PPEs, of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, sometimes a problem or problems pop up. And then they called me and said that, look, we have problem with the process of purchasing some of active ingredients, active pharmaceutical ingredients. Could you please help? Because sometimes we need also to talk via diplomatic channel. So once again, my point, Pak Philip, is that we are in one team. Of course, the division of labor is clear, but we are ready, more than happy to support each other. Because again, if we don't support each other, this war is too big to win. So we have to be united.
Right. Thank you, Ibu. Now, there are two questions that I can combine on the travel ban. Is there a rough estimation on the, when Indonesian travel ban on the foreigners be lifted? Or, with regard to so many things, it may affect tourism and so on. Probably this is not the time, but is there a rough estimate? And what are the parameters for the Indonesian government to lift it back?
For sure, this measure is temporarily in nature. That is for sure. But if you ask me, when are we going to lift that travel limitation? At this very point, I could not say anything because it will depend on the development of the situation. So again, at this point, I could not say anything when are we going to lift the travel limitation.
Okay. And this is probably the last one.
Sorry, we are not happy to do that. Of course, every country, they are not happy to do that limitation. But I think the priority right now is to stop or to reduce the outbreak from getting worse.
Okay, thank you, Ibu. Now this is from YouTube. That question, the earlier question was from Mr. Juwon Lee. But now there are questions from our YouTube viewer. Number one is there any possibility, because bearing in mind that Indonesia is a member of the UN Security Council this year, any effort to bring this COVID-19 to the Security Council to receive similar treatment as Ebola crisis before? Indonesia has been successful in getting and mobilizing so many countries that you mentioned earlier to the UNGA. But what about the UN Security Council?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is also discussed in the UN Security Council. But if you ask about, is there any result, the concrete result, yet, it's not yet there. So the discussion is going on right now within the UN Security Council. Why? Because of course, the issue of the outbreak will affect the human security in the wider terms. But for sure, there will be another draft resolution that will be tabled in the UN General Assembly related to COVID-19. So the resolution that I mentioned, co-initiated by Indonesia, was the first UNGA resolution related to COVID-19. But after that, there are some countries that try also to table some draft resolution under the UNGA. For example, based on my communication with the with the ladies or women foreign ministers, we are of the view that there is a need for us to table resolution to the UNGA related to COVID, but with a special attention to the protection of women. So we discussed this last night. So I had tasked my ambassador in New York to follow it up.
Thank you, Ibu. And this is the very, very last question.
Okay.
I think this is very important. Regarding ASEAN, we know the principle of Asian value, non-intervention, and so on. And this issue of health crisis certainly needs more interventionist cooperation, quote unquote. How do you view this in the future? What would ASEAN need to do? Because, sometimes this principle might be a challenge for us to work more deeper into the problem.
Is it related to the pandemic or not?
The pandemic, yes. This non-traditional security issue.
Okay. So can you repeat again, Pak Philip, what is the question related to the ASEAN pandemic and non-intervention?
The non-intervention, the ASEAN principle, ASEAN values, sovereignty is the number one. While this issue of pandemic certainly blurred all this sovereignty issue. So we need to take action, but sometimes ASEAN then might find it difficult.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So when we talk about the pandemic, of course, it relates to the humanitarian issue, to the welfare, to the health of human beings. And that is one thing. But on the other thing, of course, there are people living in a country. So we have to combine those two. There's a need to cooperate, but of course we have to talk to the government. So that's why I'm very happy when I had the ACC meeting and I accompanied President Jokowi to have the ASEAN summit. I'm very glad to see that the spirit of solidarity, spirit of cooperation is very obvious if we talk about ASEAN. And the cooperation in terms of COVID, I mentioned to you about Singapore. Singapore is among the first country who rendered cooperation with to Indonesia, and I also say my appreciation. For example, Cambodia, when there is the Indonesian crew, the cruise crew landed. Docking in Cambodia, and the Cambodian take care of the Indonesian national there. So there are many examples which shows that the solidarity of ASEAN prevail. I mean, not only on the paper, but when we are facing this emergency situation, then it works so far so good. So I don't think that we are facing some non-intervention issue, at least until now, related to our joint effort to fight against the coronavirus, Philip.
Yeah, Ibu, thank you. Before we close, I noticed that there was another meeting took place. That was special ASEAN-China foreign minister meeting before in Vientiane. Would you update us on what was the discussion about what would be the cooperation between China and ASEAN on this?
I think the ASEAN China foreign ministers meeting took place right after a back-to-back with the first SEC meeting. It is in Vientiane. Yes. At this time, I think it was in February, in the 20th of February. And at that time, China was on the situation, was on the difficult situation at that time. And we sat together to talk about the cooperation, to talk about the exchange of information, to talk about the other practical cooperation. And I'm sure that what we discussed in Vientiane on the 20th of February will be followed up. And I'm very glad, again, during the FPT summit, it's very clear, the commitment of leaders, the FPT leaders on the cooperation that we have to do together in our effort to fight against the virus. Because if we recall, Pak Philip, when we established the FPT was born from a crisis. The FPT established in 1999, so that's coming from the 1997 crisis in our region. And then we already worked together for 21 years. And it is proven that by having such a close cooperation, then the region, the FPT region, can survive until now. Not only survive, but it shows also that the FPT countries could act as the engine of the economic growth in the region. So President Jokowi conveyed that message very clear. If we can prove in the last 21 years of having a very strong cooperation from crisis to crisis, so we should also win the war now together among the FPT's countries.
Okay, Your Excellency, you've been very generous, and thank you for all the response and the clear message that you sent to all of us, the participants of this webinars. I hope that you stay healthy. We rely on you, on the leadership of Indonesia for the international cooperation in dealing with this COVID-19 in Southeast Asia, and in particular in Indonesia. So we do hope that you will stay healthy and safe.
You too, Pak.
Yes, and our foreign ministry can protect Indonesian nationals abroad. Thank you very much once again, Ibu Retno, and everybody attending this webinar. Thank you very much. This is recorded and will be available on YouTube after this, so you can re-watch it if you want. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Stay healthy. Stay safe, everybody. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Terima kasih.